Well, good afternoon, everyone. I thank you all for joining us today. I'm going to give a few moments for everybody to join us in this virtual space before we get our conversation started. It looks like we have a good number of individuals that have logged in today, so we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining us today. Today's conversation is about understanding the individual taxpayer identification numbers, or ITIN. We're joined by Steve Vasquez, who will be guiding us through our conversation today. But before we get started, I want to go over just a few housekeeping items. First is that this webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a copy of today's recording and presentation in the next couple of days. It'll be sent to the email that you use to register. It'll also be available on finderally.com/resources or our YouTube channel at youtube.com/finderally. Throughout today's conversation, if you have any questions for Steve, please make sure to drop them in the chat box. We'll be moderating the questions throughout today's conversation, and we have left some time at the end of today's presentation for Steve to answer any questions that are not case specific. And lastly, if you need closed captioning, you can enable that at the bottom right of your screen. If you hover over that CC icon, you'll be able to have the closed captionings enabled. With that, I'll turn it over to our featured guest today, Steve Vasquez.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me here and try to shed a little light on this particular information that sometimes a lot of us are, not knowledgeable enough, but we knew it's very important for us to go in the future, in particular because of our residency status and so forth. As you can see there, they call me Steve, but I'm actually, my legal name as a regular Latino is Luis Esteban Vasquez Salazar. And I just took it quick. I came from Peru when I was 10 years old. So like some of us, we do have to go through the process of becoming a resident and a citizen to follow through. Here's some of who I am. I did go to UC Berkeley School of Haas for business, received my accounting and finance background. After that, I went to Southwestern School of Law here in downtown LA. My main practice is tax law, and I do assist in other areas, but mostly I am a member of the California State Bar, as also of the United States Tax Court. Our offices are located here in California, in Orange County, right next to John Wayne Airport. It says there that we serve basically all, most of the Southern California area, but in reality, we do have clients throughout the state in over 30 states and about 5 countries right now. So let's get started. What basically is an ITIN? Here's some of the overview that we're going to be going to, mostly an overview of the ITIN, who would need an ITIN, some errors that might cause a delay of receiving that ITIN, and then the role that what is called a certified accepted agent does, and what do they do in particular. And then who should and should not renew an ITIN. It's a little tricky on that part, but we'll know a little bit of the explanation from that, okay? So what is an ITIN? Well, basically what an ITIN is a part of what the general terminology is called TINs, or Taxpayer Identification Numbers. They tend to be used for Internal Revenue Services. So the most common one that we're aware of is the Social Security number, the SSN, which most people have to be able to not only work, but obtain other benefits throughout that the federal government can provide for us. The other more popular one is called the Employer ID number. That is what employers have in order to identify themselves with the tax agencies as well, in order to forward any other tax information, whether it be W-2s, that I think we're familiar with, 1099s, and then other forms of 1099s or wage reporting information. The one we're talking about, obviously, the individual taxpayer identification number. What do we need that for, or what is necessary for? Well, it helps us or individuals with a couple of things. It helps us comply with the US tax laws, which provides a way to process any accounts for tax returns and payments that are necessary when we are working or have employment with the US. It's intended for federal tax purposes, but it's actually just limited to that particular area. So for Social Security purposes and stuff of that nature, they're not used. They're helpful, but they're not used. Also, in ITIN, it's used regardless of immigration status, whether you're a resident, non-resident alien. So it's mostly prepared to do the US tax filing requirements that is required for the IRS or the Internal Revenue Code. So besides filing a return, what else are the benefits of ITIN? The first one that we see there is established proof of residency. In a lot of purposes, when we get in our office, a lot of assistance that we need from a lot of times immigration attorneys is that, in a sense, we need to prove that you've been a good citizen, meaning that you have worked, filed your tax returns, and paid the corresponding taxes available. If you don't have a Social Security number that a lot of people don't have, we will need to go ahead and do it in a different way. And that is when the ITIN comes in. That is able to establish the proof of residency. Before we started here, I was talking to Alonso about some of the experiences that we had in our office. And a lot of times we have an immigration attorney that basically says, we need to, since they haven't filed tax returns, we need to file returns for them for at least 3 years. You don't have a Social Security number, so therefore we need the ITIN. I think that it's a little bit disturbing now is that it used to be just 3 years of back tax returns that we need to show. Now they're looking at 10 years or sometimes even as long as you've been in the US in order to prove their residency and going back again to us being a good citizen by paying the taxes. That's usually the main reason why we try to get an ITIN. But there are other benefits that we can go ahead and obtain from getting an ITIN. One is sometimes if you're able to try to get a loan, once you have that established ITIN and also a little bit of a work history because of the ITIN, you'll be able to get business loans if, as most of us in college in particular, we want to, create our own businesses or get very good at our profession and moving forward to do that. Until we get the Social Security number, this helps you start building up that foundation for you to be a successful individual in the business world in the future. Another thing that sometimes could help you, depending on the state, obtaining a driver's license. There are different requirements. In California, we do have an Assembly Bill 60 that helps. It was a little bit better, more beneficial in order to try to obtain that driver's license and make it a little bit easier at least. But when you apply, if some of you have applied to get a driver's license, not only do you need proof of residency, but sometimes it requires a Social Security number. And if you don't, AB 60 rule is able to go ahead and give you different ways for you to try to get that driver's license. And having an ITIN helps you with that as well. After that, it helps you open up bank accounts, just like we try to get like a business loan. Now, not all financial institutions will allow you to use an ITIN, but there are institutions that let you do that, to start establishing the good credit that we will need in the future. Once we do that, we're able to go ahead and obtain a mortgage if needed to, just to get that American dream of owning real estate or just owning our own home that we would like. Then obviously the beginning, the immigration process, as mentioned before. Then after that, also, you're going to be able to, once you open up a bank account, you're able to go ahead and start contributing to retirement accounts for the future. Unfortunately, when you do have an ITIN, you can't get the benefits of Social Security. So that's why you're able to go ahead and open up those retirement accounts if need be, just in case we need to go ahead and do that. Then also, it's a little tricky when it comes to getting the work status. In some cases, some employers will allow you to be hired with the ITIN in order to get a W-2, but that becomes a little bit tricky for them because in reality, the ITIN is used for informational purposes only, not to really work. So that's where we have a little bit of a problem. But the good news, though, is that in ITIN, you are being able to use it as a self-employed individual or a 1099. If you're not aware what a 1099 is, it's another form of reporting the wages or the income that an employer is paying you. He's not paying you as an employee, he will be paying you as an independent contractor. Okay? So at least some of the benefits that we can go ahead and get from obtaining an ITIN. There's also things you can go ahead and do for obtaining other certain tax credits and exemptions that we can talk about in a second here. And another thing too that the ITIN enables to is for healthcare purposes, at least in California, we're able to obtain through the Affordable Care Act some of the benefits that you need to have a medical coverage. Okay. So building tax-free and safe retirement, as I mentioned before. All right, how to apply for the ITIN? The easiest way to apply for an ITIN is to file a tax return. You will get your tax return, you will file what is called a 1040, and attached to the 1040, you will attach this form, the W-7. In the W-7, it's the filing instructions are pretty extensive. They're like almost 15 pages long. But as you can see from up on the top, what some of the reasons are to apply for it. As you can see from the first one, non-resident alien required to get an ITIN to claim a tax treaty benefit. Not many people utilize that, but they use it because they're from a foreign country and they are here in the States. They are legal, but they do have some financial interests that they sometimes might want to get taxed. And so they might get a tax, be able to use the tax treaty benefit in order not to pay too much taxes. The next one is one of the most common ones, a non-resident alien filing a U.S. federal tax return. And this is the one that most of the ITINs are used for. In order to start getting the resident status and start to immigration purposes, we use the one. This is the most common one. This is the one that you are filing the tax return, you're usually self-employed, or have a W-2 that needs to be converted to the ITIN, and we use this particular area, the B section, in order to file the tax return, in order to obtain the ITIN. Then other reasons would be if you have a dependent. This happens in our office quite often. We work with a lot of tech companies here in California, tech game companies, Amazon, Yahoo, that they hire talent from abroad and they're allowed to get a work visa and they bring their family. Well, the family doesn't get a social security number, but in order to file the tax return for the better benefit for them, we're able to go ahead and for the wife and all the children, if any other dependents, we also file a W-7 for them in order to get the benefit of filing not only a single, but also potentially what's called head of household status and or married filing jointly, which is a huge benefit to file a tax return. That's where this one comes in. You see the dependents for children, spouse as well. Then the other one's a little bit different, just like when you get a work visa, as you can see, a non-resident alien student, professor, researcher from that. And then also if the individual is already as I mentioned, a US visa holder, we're able to apply for that. Everything else in the application is pretty standard. You just put your name and then where you live here, or you could be abroad. There's an area here that you can put a foreign address as well. Birth information, then other information that is provided for you to go ahead and post from which country you have or you came from. Now, the interesting part about the application process for a W-7, the individual that's applying for it is not the taxpayer if you're yourself, but it actually will be the other dependent and or the spouse that will be applying for the W-7. It's a tricky form, but if you go to the right individual to assist you, whether it be a tax preparer that you may be using, a local tax preparer, an accountant, a CPA, or somebody like us, tax attorneys, we're able to assist you in not only filing for your tax return for that particular year, let's say 22 when it's finishing up right now, or 23 next year, and then attach the W-7 accordingly.
Steve,
Some
very quickly,
Sure.
does an expired ITIN remain the same once it's renewed?
Yes, same number. It's 4 years. It's like your social.
Great, thank you.
Some of the ways why W-7 might be delayed, and when you apply for it, it takes sometimes 7 to 11 weeks to you to obtain it back, and it could be longer because of certain reasons. And some of the reasons that would happen is because something is missing in the return. Some things were filed incorrect. A lot of times, the most common ways, we're going to get to what is required when you submit the W-7, the documentation that you have to show in order to not only state that you are that individual, but also your residency status. And if you don't provide them the correct formats, it'll get sent back. It's happened to our office before. The one I don't like, and we're going to get to in a bit, is that they actually misplaced the documentation. And that's why when we get back to the next section on how to submit a W-7, it's the way I recommend it actually filing than one of the ways that the IRS requests for you to file that W-7 with your tax return. As you can see that there was this not submitting the required original identifications is another way that it gets a little bit delayed when we file that. There's the proof of residency for dependents, submitting a federal tax return with an expired ITIN. We've been dealing with that quite lately, but a lot of those issues have been solved. The only time that the expired ITIN is when an individual has had an ITIN previous years and they haven't filed at least one single return in the last 3 or 4 years or so in order to make it active. If they don't have that, then we have to resubmit a new one for that. There are a lot of documents that can be required. There are basically 13 acceptable documents. The number one that works the best, if you have a valid current passport from whichever country you come from. If you have that, that's the easiest way to prove not only your residency, but your current status here. And it's the only one that they'll take, the one sole document for that. Everything else, you are required to sometimes have 2 of these documents available here, as you can see. You know, if you see the passport, that's a standalone document. That's the only one that gets accepted by itself. Then they'll take 2 of the remaining ones. Here's some samples, national ID cards from different countries. This one sometimes can be, most of us, and I think my audience is in this situation where they've been here very young. So they might not have a national document from the country you originally came from. With the help of your parents, sometimes you're able to go to a local consulate or embassy in order to apply for one. And it does. My son was born here, and my mother suggested for me to, even though he's a U.S. citizen, for us to go ahead and get him his Peruvian documents just in case. So we went to our local consulate and make the application for him, to have those documents as well. In a sense, to establish dual citizenship. So that's one of the areas that you can go ahead and get that. Yeah, you can see a driver's license. If you were young enough, you might have that driver's license already. So hopefully that's the case. If not, the ITN will help you get a driver's license. Again, the certificates for whatever country you come from. If you were a little bit older, if you had a foreign driver's license, or if you were to get a U.S. identification card when you cross the border. Border registration cards, one of the most common we see from Mexican nationals, that they have their border registration card. The U.S. military ID card. Some were able to go ahead and serve their time with one of the military forces, whether it be the Marines or Army or Navy, and they're a little bit more streamlined, to go ahead and start moving forward to become their residency status or even their citizenship status here. The visas, again, U.S. citizen cards. Now, the last couple are interesting in the fact that if you've been living here for quite a few years, showing medical records of the address that you were living currently, if you're under 6, between 6 and 14, and up to 18 if you're a student, also show school records. Now, if you're in college already, which you are, you can also show proof of that records that you have right now, whatever university or college you've been going to currently, in order to be able to prove that or have those documents ready in order to go ahead and apply for the ITIN and move forward with that, moving forward to try to get your immigration status. Now, I mentioned earlier that one of the things, and unfortunate things that we had, when you apply for the W-7, the documents, the office that uses it is in Texas. So one of the things that the IRS usually likes is you file the W-7 and you forward them the actual passport and the other 2 documents that they might require in order to do so. But as I mentioned before, we lost one of our clients. They lost the documentation. Now she's coming to reapply for it. So this is when a certifying acceptance agent comes in to assist in order to go ahead and apply for the W-7. Well, they'll do in their offices, somebody like myself, we verify the 2 things: your foreign status through the documents that you provide for us to see and review, and the identity that it is you. The individual, the CAA, helps you apply and submit the W-7 with the documents. And because they're CAA, they can actually make copies of those documents and forward it to the service location in Texas again. That way you don't have to, they don't have to keep your actual documentation, because it could take a little bit longer than what we need to go ahead and do that. And as I mentioned, we don't like it. The other thing that I actually like even better sometimes, if you can go ahead and use a CAA, the clients come to our office or go to your tax preparer, and then what your tax preparer or the CAA can do is set up an appointment with a local IRS office. The local IRS office will act like a certifying acceptance agent. They'll review those documentations, they'll block it off, and you'll put it in the W-7 application that they did review and verify the documents to show that who you are. Okay, that way you go straight to the IRS, they do it, and they don't have to keep anything. They just send the tax return with the W-7 application that you need, and try to preserve those original documents. They're so precious and very important for what we need to have moving forward. There are a lot more things that can be said about who I'm in an ITIN and what are the important things. And we can go ahead and tell you when we get done, and after having a few questions here, what we can go, contact our office to see if we can assist you in any other way. that we could do that. Okay. Let me see. We have. I have a question here since, can someone apply for an ITN outside of the tax filing process? Yes. And the way you do that is that you have opened up a bank account. And it's not through filing an actual 1040, but you actually apply the W-7 because the bank wants to and is required to withhold some taxes if you're earning interest or dividend. So that's another way to go ahead and apply for a W-7 outside of the tax filing. Another question, will most W-7 be approved for undocumented immigrants? That's part of what this is for. It helps you start establishing your immigration status. And it happens quite often that what you do then is you go ahead and apply for it. You should do a tax return. And one of the things that we get in the office sometimes, and most tax preparers will get, is an undocumented worker working, and they might get a 1099. And when you file the 1099 and you apply for it, as long as you show those two documents that are required or a passport, the W-7 will be applied whether you're undocumented or not. Okay. Just another same question. Must a W-7 be filed with a 1040 or can it be filed by itself? It can be filed by itself, but we need a couple more documents from a banking institution in order to show that the reason why you need that. Somebody just mentioned that on the IRS website, there is a list of acceptance agents, and this individual used Santa Ana off of Rosa to renew my ITIN. You know, our name is also in there with the IRS website as one of the acceptance agents as well.
I have one more question for you.
Sure.
Are there any legal immigration implications for undocumented immigrants who use an ITIN to become entrepreneurs or independent contractors who intend to adjust their status at some point?
This is the best thing to do. You will be showing that you're filing those tax returns with the 1099s that you'll be receiving and show that, yes, I've been working, I've been paying my own taxes, and I've been trying to do the best as possible, and that'll help you. I mentioned earlier during our conversation that it used to be that the immigration attorneys wanted us to file 3 back years of tax returns in order to show that they had those taxes. Now it looks like they're looking at 10 years. That's a lot, but that's how you establish it. You know, it helps you whether you've been doing. I start telling clients right now, start filing the tax returns in order to show that in the future, when you want to start legalizing your status, it is a big help. And this not only do I get from me from experience as a tax return preparer, but also from immigration attorneys that usually that's one of the first things they start looking at. How have you filed a tax return? Have you paid your taxes?
Thank you. One more quick question, unless you want to continue on.
Let me see what we have here, and then we'll go. I should go ahead.
More so related to like career pathways. If a student has an ITIN, does not have DACA status, but wants to pursue a nursing career, I think this is more about like getting a nursing license. But I'm not sure if that applies in this
Okay,
specific
yeah, you are correct. I had, must have been about 10 years ago that I had an individual that wanted to be an attorney. And we had a discussion about what it is if he's not completely documented yet. Unfortunately for him, he was trying to make a petition that the state bar did require, the fines were fine, but also you had to go ahead and be careful in the fact that you needed to have a social security card. And one of the things that we look at certain fields, as an attorney, sometimes they're looking at your moral status, your moral situation that you might be careful about. And I have not seen the question, but I could ask it saying that you came to this country and not through the fault of your own, illegally, but you stayed, the question can be asked from the moral standard saying, have you been violating a legal federal law that could bar you from becoming an attorney? That was a question I had, but no one has responded or completely answered to my satisfaction what they would see in there. I just don't see how that's popping up yet. I don't know what happened to a particular individual who was able to become a member of the bar. But that becomes important in certain fields. As you mentioned, Alonso, about nursing, I don't know from the nursing field if it will be the same as something in the legal area, or in some cases, the financial institutions. FINRA, which is the governing body of a lot of investment bankers and financial planners, they might have the same situation that the state bars will be looking at as well. You know, interesting. I have not seen it lately. I know, unfortunately for us, California is a little bit more
Yeah.
lenient in those areas. But some other states, if you go back to other states that you came from, they might be a little bit different. To be
Yeah.
honest with you, I'm not quite sure, but on my own, I'm probably going to look at it and see if there's anything that
Yeah.
the state bars have done in those areas.
I did chat that individual back to contact me because I do have some resources for licenses here in the state of California. There is a law that passed a number of years back that allows for different licenses to move to be able to get a license without a work authorization or social security number. So I can help them navigate that question.
Yeah, that'll be perfect. Yeah, it's good to know. I mean, sometimes it's difficult for me to look at it sometimes and ask, but I remember when that popped up in my office, I said, like a lot of times attorneys say, that's a good question. Let me get back to you, or it's the answer to, because we don't want to give an answer that we don't know for sure.
Exactly.
We'll do that. Just going back to some of the Q&A here. No, again, you don't have to submit your original documents or copies. The safest way is to just go to a regular taxpayer IRS office, and they'll take care of that for you. Now, if you have an ITIN, I do have an ITIN, but I have been in disability for almost 7 years. I have not done any movement with my ITIN. Am I okay, or is there something I was supposed to do? Unfortunately, if you have not filed a tax return in the last 3-4 years, you will have to renew that ITIN. It has expired. Would an undocumented college student select a non-resident alien student box? If you're filing it for that purpose and that purpose only, yes, but mostly you'll be filing it as a non-resident alien in the box B that we talked about in the box 7, because you'll be filing for tax return purposes. That'll be easier for you to utilize that particular area. Yes, question. Why sometimes has the IRS sent a letter requesting that renew the ITIN? That was to help you. In the last few years, if they saw that some of that ITINs were about to expire, they requested for you to renew it if you hadn't filed a tax return the last few years. If you have filed, your tax preparer told you they should have renewed your ITIN at that particular time. But they did send, the service did send a lot of those letters. Okay, same question almost. To apply for an ITIN, you folks need to have taxes to file. I have had some students run into issues where tax preparers ask them to make up an income to file for a justification for applying for an ITIN. Okay, you got to be careful about this one. Some preparers do say make up income. You're trying to get a benefit, a federal benefit, or trying to obtain that ITIN. If for whatever reason, when you start going through the documentation process and that INS individual officer ask you certain questions about your income, how you were making your income, it becomes a moral issue part of it that you just filed a return basically falsifying a tax return. I would try to avoid that as much as possible to make up any income. Just request or try to work for somebody who will give you the or let you work, and so you don't have that. Just I did work. Most is an independent contractor, and they'll go ahead and try to file their return. And it's called the Schedule C area to show that income in order for you to file that return. But I would try to stay away from making up income, just because you never know what could happen in the question that you have. Question. How young can a person apply for an ITIN? A 6 months old can apply for ITIN, but that individual will be a dependent of either an individual that has a social security number or who that themselves have an ITIN. So that W-7 application will go ahead and start at any particular age, but usually because they're a dependent of that individual filing a return. Will a company provide a 1099 if the contract worker does not supply an ITIN for the employer? I don't know for sure. I know that in the construction field, they don't necessarily, they'll give them, I've seen 1099s that says in the applying for the TIN number, whether it be the Social Security or ITIN number. They just leave it like that, and they do it, I think, to help you out. So some of them probably will give you a 1099, but others will do it just like that, apply for it. That way, I think that particular employer is protecting themselves in order to make sure that they do their due diligence and prepare those 1099s with as much information that they have on an individual that they're paying some money. Alonso, I'll give you, somebody's asking me, how can we contact me? They'll give you information how to contact me. One of the best ways to go ahead and actually try to contact me is through Dr. Anna Aguirre Bryant. And you contact her and she'll be able to provide her information. And also, if you just look at my name, my website is lvasquezlaw.com. Okay, so you'll be able to go ahead and find me that way for all the information needed.
We'll be sure to send out your website and the best way to contact you following in our follow-up email to everyone.
That'll work out perfect. This is a good question, and don't do it. If you have a social security number under DACA and you request an ITIN, no, absolutely not. They don't want you to, because you already have a social security number. You cannot obtain an ITIN if you already have a social. Your financial aid, should I report my school financial aid for taxes since I don't work? It depends for that. If it's full-on financial aid, then that's not taxable income. So you don't have to report it. In some cases, though, you get some kind of a work study program that you need to report that because that will be taxable. And I think we hit that. ITIN can be used to apply for other licenses, nursing, real estate, etc. That depends on some of those licensing boards. I think Alonso mentioned that you can provide that information as well. Can a person who lives outside the country apply for ITIN? That is changed a little bit. Our neighboring countries, Canada and Mexico, the IRS had originally made it easy for you to apply to ITIN. You had to actually go to the US consulate or embassy in those countries in order to apply for the W-7. But lately, when we tried to do that, there's been a little bit of a glitch in order to obtain that. And I'm not quite sure what's going on now, why I think it has to be done here, that you have to be living in the States or be here in order to apply for W-7. Because what happens sometimes is you might have an individual who's married, has a spouse, has children in other countries, in this case would be Canada or Mexico. And in order to apply to file their tax returns, they would like to put them as dependents or as a spouse, and we're able to file those tax returns accordingly. We would submit those forms to them to where they were located, and then they would take that to the local consulate or embassy, and they will help them fill out the W-7 there. But in particular during COVID, a lot of things happen, and we don't know exactly what's going on in that nature, and now we need to find out exactly what's in that status. But before that, we were able to do it, no problem. We were actually able to do it from a client that the wife was in Egypt, and we were able to obtain an ITIN for her, even though she was never in the country. We got that ITIN, the W-7 application, through the consulate in Egypt, in Cairo to be exact. Lance, okay, then one of the questions is asking, can you send that information about licensing for the X-ray program and so forth? Yeah, we'll try to forward the information about the licensing requirements in some of areas of professions. Okay, here's a very good question. If someone applies for an ITIN and as part of their supporting documents, they submit a pay stub for a job where they used a made-up Social Security number and the number appears in the packet, are there any consequences? Will the person be denied and reported? We call the IRS, we do what are called tax compliance checks with some compliance a lot in our office. On a very few occasions, the intake individual with the IRS, will ask that question saying that, so what were they doing using somebody else's Social Security number? And my job is basically to tell them, what do you care? That's not their job to be asking that question, but they do some cases. And I just said, I just need that information to file the tax return. And that's all we require, please. Can you forward it to us? And I tend to stop them at that. Do they report anybody? I've never seen them reporting or anything like that. What has happened is that now we have a client who his Social Security or their Social Security number has been used by somebody already. And then they used to file that tax return. That doesn't necessarily happen when somebody, an undocumented individual, is trying to obtain that benefit, but it's usually because of identity theft. Because of that, sometimes the IRS or the service will not give you that information of that individual using that tax return, just can't. They're trying to protect the taxpayer and they don't know if that's the actual taxpayer. What has happened is that taxpayer, happened to us years ago, he pulled up the wage and income information from the IRS, saw the address that the individual had used, and also the employer's ID number, and they actually went to that location and basically said, you will never use the Social Security number because that's not him. This is me. And unless you report it, I will report you to the IRS. And that was in that way. They went to that employer. They didn't run into the individual using that name, but they did go to the employer and they did threaten them with basically like a whistleblowing saying that you've been using illegal undocumented individuals in order to do that. Going back again to what is an ITIN help? The question is, are college students who are not employed but wish to establish their credit can apply for individual taxpayer identification number, even if they do not possess a 1040 or 1099 form? You have to see a specific bank. Some banks will require, but you have to deposit money. And once you deposit the bank account, they will give you what a form called a W-9. And the W-9 will require you to have a TIN, whether it be a social security number or the ITIN. And that's another way to obtain a W-7 instead of filing a 1040. That's another way that you can go ahead and try to obtain the ITIN number, because the financial institutions have to be able to go ahead and report that interest earned or dividend earned to the IRS. Is there any way to get a job with an ITIN? Unfortunately, you're not supposed to get a job, a W-2 job, but they are being able to use as a sole proprietor or self-employed individual. That some companies or some smaller companies will take that ITIN and provide you with a 1099, in order to file your tax returns later. What is the probability of getting audited your first time filing for an ITIN? And what do you do if you're getting audited by the IRS? Those are two different questions. Less than 2% of tax returns get audited. Individual tax returns get audited as it is. And just by having an ITIN does not increase your chances or the probability that you're gonna get audited. Most audits are done by computers. They're called CP notices or computer produced notices. The only way you will be audited if for whatever reason your ITIN doesn't match the name that was assigned with that ITIN. And then what happens then, you would just get a letter notifying you that we cannot match information with the information that we have on file. And that's a form of an audit, but it's not a deep involved audit of anything else besides that one line item issue, which is trying to verify your identity. And if you do get audited, that's a different issue. Who knows what you could be audited for, having too many deductions or having other issues. So those are two different questions, but not necessarily related to an ITIN application. Just another common question. What happens if I use a fake social security number and then I get an ITIN? Do I use the ITIN for taxes, but with a fake social security number? Will this hurt me in the future? As long as you're filing the ITIN, you're establishing that necessary record so you can go ahead and start getting the future documents that are necessary to become legal in the future. Sometimes what we're able to try to do is we try to move some of that Social Security taxes that you paid, and we try to move it to your new ITIN, and then after that, move it to the good social once you're able to obtain that new Social Security number. For college students, can you utilize your school's 1099-T to file taxes and apply for an ITIN? I don't see why not, but the 1099-T has to have some form of TIN or taxpayer ID number, whether it be a social or an ITIN. Since you have to file the return in order to try to get that benefit, I don't see why you cannot file that 1040 with the educational credit form for that 1099 or the 1098-T. Again, going back. Based on my understanding, undocumented individuals cannot work legally in the US without a social. That is correct. So in that case, how is it possible to attain an ITIN? Because again, you're working for somebody as a self-employed individual. And in order to file the income taxes, the taxes that you, in order to file the income that you earn in the self-employment, you need to file and obtain that ITIN as a sole proprietorship using Schedule C. The regular terminology is you should file a tax return when you earn all kind of income, any sort of income, whether it be cash, barter, trade, you get an item for doing what you work. That is basically income. It's called an accession of wealth. And when you get that accession of wealth because you work, you have to file a tax return. You're required to do so, to file a tax return. So if you don't have an ITIN, then that's how you file and obtain that ITIN by filing your tax return. It's a pretty well established thing that a lot of immigrants, documented or undocumented, they come for the American dream and they set up their own little companies. And we know in different areas, they have to clean offices, they work for construction companies, they sometimes open their own lunch trucks when they're able to, and they're making money. In order to report the taxable income, in order to proceed for the future or try to get documented, you need to file those tax returns. Once you apply, the W-7 says pretty well in there. It says in there under Section B that you're applying to file a tax return, and then you get that ITIN. You cannot legally work, but you can do work self-employed in order to get the 1099. If I have an ITIN but don't meet the income threshold to file taxes, will it affect me if I don't go forward with filing a tax return? I will file the return anyways, even if you make only $3,000. I will file the return to again establish the fact that you have been filing returns and paying taxes for your documentary purposes moving forward. The minimum requirement to file a tax return is $12,950, but that's W-2. If you make less than that amount of money, you're not going to owe income taxes, but you will owe the self-employment taxes. So you will still have to file a tax return and then try to obtain that ITIN. This question about financial aid, I'm not privy and I'm not going to be able to answer the question, which is there a limit to the amount of financial aid an organization can distribute to a student without an ITIN number? That I don't know. I know that there are many charities that provide those funds anyways, and I don't think they look for if you have a social security number or not.
I think that might be referring to the 1099 threshold of being under $600 or $599 before it triggers the 1099.
Yeah, correct. So if you're in a business or a trade, if you pay an individual more than $600 more, you're supposed to give them a 1099. And if they don't, you really don't need a 1099 to file a tax return. That's also what happens in our office. Go back again to the housekeepers. None of them, let me rephrase that. A couple of our clients do get 1099s from some employees, but some of them are just cleaning regular homes. And those people in those households don't give them 1099s, but they made sufficient enough money that they file their tax returns because they know they have to file moving forward. And that's what they do. So even though one particular company that you might work for, you only might have earned $400, if you work for another one that you earn another $400, then it doesn't really matter. You already made income. Technically speaking, if you made $1 in self-employment, you're supposed to file a tax return. A lot of people don't because they look at the minimum of filing a tax return of the right now for your individual is the $12,950. This one is interesting. So if a person has never had a job yet, but is an adult, do they have to file to first apply for an ITIN as a dependent? It could be. That adult could be 18, 19 years old, but still with parents, living at home with parents because you're going to school. So then and by the way, parents in this particular circumstance should have done it a long time ago. They should have made an application for the W-7 for that dependent when they file their own tax returns accordingly. Now, if you're on your own and have never filed, then what I would do is apply for an ITIN, even though you don't work, but you have some funds because you've gotten some grants from your school, then you need to put it in a bank account, and that's how you would apply for that ITIN, by making that deposit at that financial institution. I talked to Dr. Brian before about this a while ago. Can you get an ITIN for school purpose only? And that's not part of the reasons or requirements to obtain a W-7. So my question was, in some schools, they go to the school, but they don't have the W-7, and in order to give them the 1098T, you would need to have that ITIN in order to get it. So it's kind of like a catch-22 on how to go ahead and get that ITIN for school purposes. So that one I wasn't quite sure when I talked to Dr. Bayan about that particular issue, if you do need an ITIN for school purposes. And that is outside of kind of like the tax purview. So I'm not quite sure what that being. I think we left it at that she did tell me that the schools will accept some of the students without having that ITIN.
I know we have a lot of great questions still pending in the chat, but I think we have time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions.
Yeah,
I
that's
do
what I'm saying too. Yeah, we'll do
for
a couple
everyone.
more, and then let's
But
see.
we will share the information to get a whole, connect with your law office. We'll share some additional resources on some of the other questions around like entrepreneurship and employment. But I think we have time for 1 more, and then I'll close this out, Steve.
Okay, let me look at this one. That's a good one here. Let's see. This is one interesting. Can I use an old tax return to apply for an ITIN? And then what are the documents I need to submit together with a tax return? You can only apply for an ITIN in the current year. What you can do, once you get that ITIN, you can go back 3 years to amend the return to include that ITIN that you received when you filed the most current tax year. And that's how you would do it. Okay. I know there's a lot of questions out there. You will receive some of my information to contact me if you want to go ahead and do so directly. And I'd be more than happy, or ops more than happy to assist you with those questions or any other needs that you may have. I'd like to thank you for giving me a little bit of your time to try to explain some of the issues that are related with the ITIN and some of the filings and necessities that ITIN is good for in the future for you. And thank you again.
Thank you for joining us today. And thank you everyone that participated. I wish we had more time to get to all of your questions, but we will share today's presentation as it was recorded. We'll share the PowerPoint presentation, and we'll go through some of the questions and find the resources to hopefully answer in parts some of the questions that are still pending in the chat. But thank you all for joining. We will be sure to send out all of these resources in the upcoming days. And you can also find additional information on finderally.com. If you want to schedule an appointment with an immigration attorney to answer any immigration questions. And then for our Cal State participants today, if you go to finderally.com/CSU, it'll link you to the legal services there, and as well as for individuals joining us from the UC system, if you go to finderally.com/UC, they will direct you to the legal services for the UC system. So again, thank you all. Thank you, Steve, for your expertise and knowledge and connecting with us for today.
Thank you. Have a good day, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.